is being used as a replacement for animal therapy in nursing homes, which is really kind of awesome.
So she built planets on Earth, you guys.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Museum of Science, Boston, and our very special event with Kevin Powell, an evening of conversation and poetry. You can make some noise. It's a Thursday night. He's here. He's right there. He can hear you. I'm James Monroe. I'm the senior producer of adult programs and theater experiences here at the museum. And tonight I have the great pleasure of welcoming you to this really special evening of conversation and poetry. And we're so thrilled to have with us tonight, among the many hats that he wears, and among his many titles, the acclaimed writer of 16 books, the one and only Kevin Powell. And he has put together a really wonderful evening of dialogue and poetry readings and so much more for all of us tonight. We're thrilled to have him here. And he's going to be joined in conversation by our moderator for the evening, writer, multidisciplinary artist, and director of the MFA program in creative writing at Emerson College, 𝘎𝘪𝘰𝘤𝘬𝘕. And they have put together a really wonderful night for you. I just want to start tonight off by thanking both of them for being here and joining us here at the museum. And thank you for all coming out and spending your Thursday night with us. And tonight is a part of our current winter-spring season of adult programming here at the museum. We still have a great lineup to come, some really fantastic events. So I encourage you on your way out tonight to pick up our season mailer or check out our website at mos.org/adults. Now, after their conversation tonight, Kevin and 𝘕𝘬𝘰 will have a chance to take questions from all of you. So whether you're watching with us at home or you're here in the theater, to submit a question for Kevin at any time, all you have to do is pull out your smartphone and go to slido.com and enter the code Kevin Powell, all one word, just as it appears on the screen, and they'll get through a bunch of those a little bit later on. And tonight is also very special because it is a partnership with our friends at New England Blacks in Philanthropy. And this is really exciting. This is the first time our organizations have partnered on an event like this, and it's been such a joy. They've been so crucial in making tonight possible. And we have with us the president and CEO of the organization. So please join me in giving a hand and welcoming to the stage 𝘕𝘬𝘰 Carter.
Thank you so much, James. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here this evening. We are delighted to partner in this space to have this amazing conversation. You know, we often think that he that controls the image controls the mind. And when you think about that, literature has an image. It sets a mood. It sets a tone. And I'm so delighted to be here with two of my very best friends, 𝘕𝘬𝘰𝘤𝘕𝘪 and Kevin Powell, to really think about not only language and how it impacts us and how it affects us, but really talk through some of the things that they think about and they've been writing about as well. I'm just delighted to be here. And for those of you that are at home, we're so delighted that you're here with us as well. Thank you again, James. Thank you for inviting us, and we look forward to this partnership. To learn more about us, you can go to our website at nebip.org, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you, James.
Thank you so much, 𝘕𝘬𝘰, and to everyone on your team for making tonight possible. And I also need to say a big thank you to our friends at the Lowell Institute for making tonight possible as well. It is because of them that tonight is free for all of you. So a huge thank you to everyone at the Lowell Institute. All right, now on to the main event. It's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce our speakers tonight. Son of a single mother, born and raised in Jersey, studied at New Jersey's Rutgers University, became a man in Brooklyn, New York, human and civil rights activist, poet, journalist, public speaker, filmmaker, former two-time candidate for United States Congress in New York City, marathon runner, vegan, hip-hop historian, writer of an upcoming biography of Tupac Shakur, and author of 16 books, including his new collected writings, The Kevin Powell Reader and Grocery Shopping with My Mother. And he's here tonight in Boston at the Museum of Science for one night only. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the one and only Kevin Powell in conversation with 𝘕𝘬𝘰𝘤𝘕𝘪.
Can I? What's up, y'all? Yeah. How y'all doing? All right.
Hello, everybody. Before we start, full disclosure, Kevin and I go back
A long
more than
time.
30 years.
Yeah.
He's one of my oldest, dearest friends.
One of mine.
I guess what? Maybe 1990, I'm thinking?
We were kid writers.
Yes.
Very young
Yeah.
writers.
Yeah. So, and I've had the opportunity to have conversations with Kevin in similar forums through the years and in different spaces. It's always a pleasure, always a joy. We'll keep it casual. I got some questions for you, and you can just go wherever you want with them. Think of them as icebreakers.
I'm cool with that.
All right. So you've been at the forefront of several significant literary and cultural developments. Right now, I'm thinking of two in particular. Your first anthology that you co-edited with Ross Baraka, In the Tradition, and your work as a journalist, primarily in Vibe magazine, but a lot of other places, right? I remember you doing that work before Vibe existed, for example.
Before we had any money.
Yes.
Really any money, for real.
So In the Tradition is a landmark collection for our generation of Black writers. It brought many of us into print for the first time, including me. You charted the rise of hip-hop in your journalism alongside writers like Scott Polson Bryan and the great Joan Morgan.
Yes, shout out to Joan and
Yes.
Scott.
It wasn't the first time Black people created an art form, but perhaps one of the first times where Black writers had a hand in shaping the narrative from the first note, telling the story of an art form. How did it feel at the time to be in these places, to be in these workspaces at the time? Did you have a sense of the importance and the durability of what you were writing? Because people are still citing those articles that you all published way back when.
Wow. I mean, first of all, I just want to thank God for this opportunity. My mom is the reason why I'm a writer. I want to acknowledge my wife who's here. Thank you as my brother. I want to thank James Monroe and this museum. I want to thank y'all for coming. I really appreciate y'all being here. I don't take any of this for granted at all. I want to shout out Keith Maskell and Justice Roe Williams if they're out there. The Love You Brothers. Thank y'all for recommending me to this space. Thank you. It's just really a great opportunity. And if you've lived long enough, I'm going to answer your question, but if you've lived long enough and you've had a lot of ups and downs in life as a writer, as an artist, you just appreciate every moment that you can get, you know. So I wanted to say that. Just thank you all for being here. I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. Wow. What I will say, Jabari, is that when I went to college, Rutgers University in New Jersey, when I got to Rutgers, I knew absolutely nothing about Black history, Black culture. I didn't even know that Black people wrote books. I had no idea. My mother did the best that she could. You know, she took me to the library when I was 8 years old. That's how I fell in love with books. And by the time I was 11, I knew I wanted to be a writer, but it was a writer who wanted to be Ernest Hemingway, who wanted to be Shakespeare, who wanted to be Edgar Allan Poe. Great writers, but unfortunately, when we see happening in 2023, the erasing of, the attempt to erase Black history, Black literature, Black, you know, everything that was happening in Florida, not just Florida, but around the country. I got to Rutgers, and my whole world was changed because for the first time, I started hearing the names of Black writers like James Baldwin, you know, like Richard Wright, like Zora Neale Hurston, and that made me know that I came from a tradition, you know, that there was something possible that I could actually be a writer. My high school yearbook actually said that I wanted to be an accountant because I was poor, and I figured they make money because they handle money, and poor people don't want to be poor. That's just real, right? But I had an English teacher named Lillian Williams, who she died years back, but she entered me into an essay contest as a high school senior. I was 17 years old, a citywide contest in my hometown in Jersey City, and I won the contest. And that was the first time I was like, man, I can actually win something other than playing sports, because I was an athlete growing up too. I played baseball, I love baseball. Yes, I'm a lifelong Yankees fan. Don't hold that against me, Boston.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, you know.
You're brave to say that here.
And I've been to Fenway Park to games, which was a fascinating experience. Just like, but no, real talk though. I love baseball, but that shifted for me when I got to college. I discovered the E185 section of the library where all the Black books are, you know, and that's when I began to realize, oh, there's a Harlem Renaissance. Shout out to Dr. Cheryl Wall, who's no longer alive, but she taught a class called Harlem Renaissance. I was like, man, there was a Harlem Renaissance. I learned about, you know, my two closest friends in college were West Indian. One was Bayesian, one was from Trinidad and Tobago. I learned about the negritude movement of writers from the Caribbean, from Africa. And then I learned about the Black Arts Movement, you know, that produced Mary Baraka, Nikki Giovanni, Maya Angelou, all those folks, Audre Lorde, et cetera. And that changed me. And so by the time we got to the early 90s and hip hop had exploded, I'm a lifelong hip hop head, y'all, and shout out to hip hop turning 50 this year, right? You know what I'm saying? Oh yeah, absolutely. I knew that I came from a tradition by that point because I had read Baraka's Blues People and I had studied a lot of stuff. And I was like, well, hip hop has got to be what was before, you know, and even Tribe Called Quest, Q-Tip said in one of his songs that his father said to him, hip hop is what bebop was. And so you're connecting these dots. So, hey, DJ Nomadic, that's my sister right there. Oh my God, peace to you, sis. And so that's what I was coming out of. And the reason why we created In the Tradition, and shout out to Ras Baraka. Ras Baraka, y'all, went from, he and I co-edited this book as 20-something writers to him being the voice. When you hear the teacher on the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, that's Ras Baraka, son of Mina and Mary Baraka, and Ras is now the mayor of Newark, New Jersey. So it's deep, you know what I mean? But it's like, and so we were all involved in this whole scene, this movement. 𝘕𝑁𝑔 and I were at the Black Writers Conference at Medgar Evers College that's produced by Dr. Brenda Green, who's the mother of 𝘕𝑩𝑦 Kweli. We would go to the National Black Arts Festival, and you would have people there like Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison and 𝘕𝑩𝑦 𝘕𝘠𝘰 and all these folks. And here we were in the middle of all of this stuff. And so it was an incredible time. And when we look back on the 90s now, the music, I mean, my wife and I watched Martin over and over again, Living Single over and over again. It was the movies, it was the TV shows, it was the fashion. You had black on this, black on that. It was definitely a movement. And so we were part of that. And with hip hop, I just knew that as someone, I grew up a b-boy. I was a dancer for a long time. I'm a two-step person now, of course, but I was a and I also tag. My nickname is Kepo, K-E-P-O-1, Kepo1, because that was my graffiti tag. You know what I mean? And so I was in the culture. I was in the clubs in the 80s. You know, it was incredible. You know, and it just to be able to write about hip hop, something that I was actually a participant in, was deep to me, and I took it very seriously. I was like, this is as important as what Langston was doing with the blues. This is what Barack and Sonia Sanchez were doing with jazz music. Does that make sense, y'all? And so myself, Scott Polson Bryan, Joan Morgan, Dream Hampton, Torre, Nelson George, Greg, rest in peace, Greg Tate, you know what I mean? Harry Allen. I mean, there's so many writers who came along. Michaela Angela Davis. I mean, this is not about me. Whenever I take a stage, it's important to acknowledge all the folks that were around that were building this thing. And so we were creating stuff that we didn't know it at the time that people now call hip hop journalism. You know, so we were definitely part of that. And then within the tradition, you know, I was a journalist, but I also was a poet. So I came up in the New York Poets Cafe scene. Shout out to my Boricuas out there, the Puerto Rican community in New York City. You know what I mean? And so I was there performing poetry as well. And it was just beautiful, man. It was just a beautiful thing. And I was like, I know you felt the same way. How do you actually survive as an artist, as a writer? And you just figure it out. You just figure it out. But I knew that writing was as important to me as breathing. And that's what I had to do with my life. Even though my mom's at the time was like, you're crazy, you need to get a real job. You know what I'm saying? But now my mom tells people, my son got books. He got a lot of books. So I guess I did all right, right? So, but that's what it was for me. It was incredible. Did I know what we were doing would be considered historic? Like, people now cite stuff that we write. You know, like this book, y'all, this collected writings, the first essay in the book intentionally is the essay that I won when I was a teenager, when I was 17 years old. And the last piece in the book is a piece on Kendrick Lamar, his last album that came out last year. And I had to I found the essay. I actually found the person who awarded me the savings bond for $100 when I was 17. And I called and I said, I just want to thank you, you know, because you don't know what you did. And I said, I have 16 books now. She said, are you serious? I said, yeah. I said, because this winning this little thing when I was 17 years old, a kid with a single mother, no father, it changed my life. Seriously. Yeah. Even though I wanted cash instead of the savings bond. That's what it is in the hood, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We want cash. Or cash at me, as we say now.
That's what they say. Yeah. So this, you know, I want to talk about, you've already kind of touched on the sort of the cultural through line that runs through a lot of the work that you do and a lot of the work that you appreciate. And in your introduction to In the Tradition, you wrote, we are the art. We are the what is of what was. We are the next step after total silence.
Wow.
And most importantly, we are the living. I always appreciated the way that that particular book and the work you've continued to produce is always in dialogue with the work that preceded yours. And you've kind of already demonstrated that with what you've shared with us so far.
Wow.
Your poems, your essays are rich in allusions to Amiri Baraka, Langston Hughes, Sonia Sanchez, Bell Hooks. The list goes
I
on
gotta
and
shout
on.
out Bell Hooks. Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like, so reading the two new books is similar to reading your previous books in that the reader is not just in conversation with you, but they're in conversation with all these other people. And that's part of what makes them rich and valuable, I think. But how important has it been for you to recognize and commune with these elders and ancestors? And how important is it for up-and-coming writers to do the same?
Wow. Wow. That's a great question. I would say to people, no matter what community you come from, like we know that, you know, the Boston, New England area, you have a big Cape Verdean community, a big West Indian community, a big Irish community, African-American community, there's Puerto Ricans here. No matter what your identities are, you should know who you are. You know what I mean? You should actually know who you are. I think about that Audre Lorde quote about how we need to celebrate our differences even as we come together. It's not an either or, it's both. And so for me, once I went from black self-hatred, which is what I was the first 18 years of my life, because that's what I was taught in the school system, to hate myself as a black person. How do you do that? I didn't see myself as a black person in anything. Not in science, not in math, not in literature, not in history, none of it. And then I was taught to hate myself in the churches that I went to. How do you do that? An image of a white Jesus, no black Jesus whatsoever. I was taught to hate myself in the mass media culture, film, TV, magazines, etc. You know, and so it's really important for me to say this to you all, no matter what your identity is. And it's not just black folks. You know, I didn't learn anything about Latinx folks. I didn't learn anything about Irish folks. I didn't learn anything about Italian folks. I didn't learn anything about queer folks. I learned nothing about women, disabled folks. We can go on down a list of folks. Y'all feel what I'm saying? It's like, you know, it's called educational malpractice when you are saying that you're getting an education, but you don't actually see yourself in the education that you're getting. Does that make sense, y'all? And so for me, as a writer and an activist both, and I got this equal for me, because when I was 18 years old, I was like, I got to do both of these things. What was important was that I had to claim this legacy that I had been denied. And so, you know, I had to do a deep dive into who I was. And so my first work for years was just about race and racism. You know what I mean? And then over time, I began to realize, you know what, you can't just be opposed to oppression that's convenient for you. You can't just say, I'm anti-racist. I want to be anti-sexist. I want to be anti-homophobia, transphobia, ageism, classism, any form of hatred, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. But it had to start with the fact that I was told that I was nothing. You know what I mean? And essentially what people are doing in this country right now in these times is telling folks, no, we don't want any AP African American Studies courses. You're nothing. We don't want any of this stuff that y'all are trying to say because we don't want that history. And what we do every time we do that, because I think about, what I was taught growing up. Crispus Attucks, Boston Tea Party. Dr. King had a dream, but it's almost like he had a dream, Montgomery bus boycott, then homie was dead. And I was like, well, what else did he do? We didn't even know. Y'all feel me? Now we're laughing, but that's actually horrific, because then what was left out of it was his evolution around economic justice, poor people's campaign. Y'all feel what I'm saying? His opposition to war, to violence globally, not just in America. And so for me, my activism informed my writing. You know what I mean? My reading informed my writing and my reading of us. And I began to fall in love with us. I was ashamed, for example, how my mother speaks, because she's from South Carolina and they are proud Geechees. And I used to be told that my mother spoke bad English or broken English. Well, if you speak Creole or Patois or Geechee Gullah, that's actually beautiful poetry, y'all. And when I began to study black literature like Paul Laurence Dunbar and Zora Hurston and Langston Hughes, and I started listening to the blues, and I'm like, wow, wait a minute. The very language that I was ashamed of is actually the language that has been permeating this country the whole time from the very beginning. You feel what I'm saying? In fact, that language built this country. Harvard University, Princeton University, even Rutgers, where I went to school, Georgetown, it was built on the backs of people, free labor, who spoke the same language as my mom's. Y'all with me out there? Mm-hmm. And so I began to shift from self-hatred to self-love, and I was like, I got to put this into my writing, into my art, because, man, black is beautiful, man. And I've been told it was ugly. You know what I'm saying? And so that's what I think about a lot now, is like we fighting, to maintain something that our folks fought for during the civil rights movement. You know, you got people saying crazy stuff, 𝘠𝘭𝑟, and I'll stop here. You know, black studies is segregation, or Latinx studies is segregation, or women's studies, gender studies is segregation. What people are really saying is that, you know what, we don't actually really believe in democracy. What we believe in is oligarchy in the hands of a few people. What we really believe in is white supremacy, racism, and what we really believe in is patriarchy, and what we really believe in is dividing people and pitting people against each other. What we really believe in is violence, division, hatred, and fear. And what we really believe in is we wish this country was 1923 instead of 2023. That's where we are right now. You know what I mean? And so you're right, from my early stuff to my later stuff, it's a fight for freedom. You know, but I realize now that my fight for freedom is not just about me as a cisgender, heterosexual, straight, so-called straight black man, but it's about, hey, James is my brother, you're my sister, whatever you, or if you're non-gender conforming, all of y'all are part of this thing. And how do I know that? When George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery lost their lives in 2020, and we saw that explosion of people who were in streets all around the country, this rainbow coalition that Fred Hampton coined when he was alive as the head of the Black Panther Party in the state of Illinois, that's what we saw in the streets in 2020. The problem, y'all, and what we need to think about, and I'm not trying to proselytize here, but since I got y'all here for a minute, I do need to say this. The right wing in this country has been organizing at least since Nixon was elected in 1968, which happened to be the same year that Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy, a black person and a white person, were assassinated, right? And here we are thinking, okay, the summer of 2020 was wonderful. Well, that's a summer. I'm saying to y'all, if we really want to change this country, the civil rights movement was actually 1955 to 1968, 13 years. You know what I mean? And we can't take our foot off the gas pedal, because literally the stuff that I dealt with and you dealt with when we were in college, we're still dealing with now. And we've got to figure out ways to come together as allies, as accomplices, as partners. Like Brother James said, here's our partners, right? You know, but it means that we got to see what we have in common. So my work is informed by people, and at some point I began this, you know, I love James Baldwin, but I also began to gravitate towards bell hooks and black women writers, you know, like her, because I was like, Bell is connecting the dots here. What Kimberly Crenshaw calls this intersectionality. You know what I mean? And that's important to say, because it's like a lot of folks, as my wife always says, are very, very confused about what it is. And I think what writing does, what art in general should do, if it's clear art, great art, at least decent art, is, I hope my work is decent, you know, after all these years, is to try to make sense out of the madness of what we're living through. Does that make sense, y'all? You know what I mean? That's what I think.
Every time we have one of these conversations, or I hear you in conversation, one of the things I appreciate is there's no discernible distance between the Kevin Powell that's on the page and the Kevin Powell that's on the stage.
Nah, because a lot of writers are fakers.
Yeah, so.
A lot of activists are fakers,
yeah,
man.
so I really appreciate that. And so I want to go back and forth a little bit between, I guess, content and craft, because I think one of the dangers of appreciating the power of your ideas is overlooking the power of the craft. So, you know, it's not just you saying things that we agree with or that resonate with us, because a number of people can say those things. Right. But it's the shape they take when you put them on the page. So one of the forms I associate with your work is the epistolary form, writing things in the form of letters. You've written essays, poems, and books in the form of letters to
I love letters.
To loved ones, general readers, and others. And it really strikes me, because I remember in the early days of our friendship, you were the only person I knew who had a copy of the Langston Hughes Orna Bonton letters, which were, at that time, it was hard to get a hold of. And I was like, this brother has a copy. And he not only has a copy, but he can quote from it, right? Wow. So you were talking to me about being drawn to that form before you began to publish widely in that form. And so you were ahead of the curve when you took it on. We see a lot of those now, a letter to this person, you know. And I know that you were in conversation with Baldwin and other people who've taken this form. But can you talk a little bit about what the appeal is for you as a writer in addressing subjects in this? Because you've addressed a whole lot of different stuff in that form.
Well, I mean, you know, if I can just speak as an African American for a second, my mother and two of her sisters migrated from South Carolina up to Jersey City, where I was born and raised, and they wrote letters back south. The letters went back and forth, and I remember that, you know what I mean? And I think it's a lost art form. I mean, obviously, we're texting now and on social media, and all of that. But I just remember how important letters were from people who had, black folks in America. There's been like an internal immigration because we've gone from the South to California, where my wife was born and raised, to, up here to New England, to Jersey, to New York. And people would communicate with letters. And so that always stood out to me. I got to put this letter in the mail. I think a lot of stuff that I do was very subconscious, what I got from my mother and my aunts. How they talked in the house, how they talked about their lives. I'm going to ask you all not to film this whole thing because it's being filmed, just out of respect for the intellectual property of the museum, because I see people pull out their cameras. And also, respectfully, I just ask folks, please, to listen, because one of the things I think about, with all due respect to you all, I see so many people doing this now. I'm like, I feel like we lose our humanity when we just pull our phones out, instantly record everything. It's going to be on the website. Y'all can just watch it. It's easy. You know what I mean? Seriously. And also think about the fact that this is intellectual property that we're just putting out there randomly. And some of us make our living from speaking, if that makes any sense to y'all. Y'all cool with that? Plus, I just think we should be human beings. Dr. King said in '67, we as Americans were moving from being a thing-oriented society to a people-oriented society to a thing-oriented society. We were obsessed with things. That was 1967. I think it's worse now with iPhones and Androids. And I like my iPhone, I'm just saying. But I just love letters. Baldwin's letter to his nephew, and both his essays in The Fire Next Time are referred to as letters. You know what I'm saying? And that stuck with me. I mean, I love James Baldwin. I don't think there's been a more brilliant essayist in American and world literature than James Baldwin, in my humble opinion. Which is why when Black Lives Matter exploded in the summer of 2020, you saw people quoting Baldwin all over the place. And now we need to say this, people did not dig Baldwin in the last 15 years of his life, and people were dissing him, writing him off, trashing him. And it's very interesting to me how people will dig someone up after they're dead, but not appreciate them while they're still here. Baldwin was so ahead of his time, and so I thought about how he wrote a lot. And you're right, I didn't think about it. Even in my poetry collection, I had the good fortune, and it was hard to say goodbye to Bell Hooks at her home in Kentucky as she was dying in her living room, literally, because she's a mentor of mine. And there's a letter to Bell Hooks in a poetry book, you know what I mean? Because I wanted to just speak to her, because she couldn't talk at the end of her life. And this is someone who taught me new things about manhood, who taught me not just about racism and sexism, but I saw how she used her voice to talk about homophobia, transphobia, all these different things. And she had such an impact on me. And I think writing in letter form, be it a poem or an essay, I think it makes it personal, but also invites the audience in a different kind of way. Does that make sense, y'all? I'm sorry my voice is cracking. I'm just thinking about Belle right now. Because I can hear her voice. Kevin, just hurry up and finish. Belle was no joke. If y'all get a chance, if you've never seen it, there's a conversation on video on YouTube that I did with Bell Hooks at the New School. And Belle, she was a gangster poet, y'all. She was no joke, and I love her, and I miss her, you know.
So a couple of things you've always done that you're continuing to do is you've championed other writers.
Yeah.
Right? I remember you singing the praises of Bell Hooks decades ago, and many other writers. And not just elders, but your contemporaries. So I want to give you props for that and thank you for that, because you've always been very generous in a competitive kind of, a lot of people are competing. And you've always been like, now I'm not available to do this, but I can give you 3 names of people who can. You've always done that.
I mean, it's the activist side. I mean, I just think it's selfish if you call yourself a leader, an artist, an activist, a writer, whatever your art form is, and you don't help other people, or there's some sort of string attached to it. I want y'all to remember a name. It's a young man. I just was the Toni Morrison writer in residence for a year at Prairie View in Texas. Mm-hmm. It's a young man named 𝘕𝘰𝘠𝘕. Remember that name? He's from the West Coast, from the West Side. This young man can write like nobody's business. 𝘕𝘰𝘠𝘕. And I think we have a responsibility to help people coming behind us. I believe in the Harriet Tubman theory. Don't just get yourself free, but go back and free other people. Does that make sense, y'all? You know what I mean? But we have a lot of selfishness out there. And, unfortunately, in these spaces, people, it's ego, it's senseless competition, it's jealousy. I mean, 𝘕𝑠𝘠 and I, I'm not going to say any names or any groups of writers, but we saw that in the 90s as young writers, when people were competing, who's the hottest young black writers out there. I'm not even talking about slams. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about just people who were insane with their hatred and jealousy of each other. And here we are talking about folks in the hood, wilding out, but some of the worst behavior I've ever seen have been people who call themselves public intellectuals, leaders, activists, writers. Straight up, you know what I mean? So I was like, I believe in, like Eve Ensler, who now goes by V, and Bell Hooks both have said, you got to create the world that you want to see. And I think the world we want to see, in my humble opinion, is practicing, selflessness and help people. And even if it's just one conversation, you never know what kind of life, you can touch somebody, just one conversation. People always get on me, and Brother James, I'm going to warn you, I am going to sign every book, and I'm going to talk to every single person on the line, because I think it's rude. If people are kind enough to come and support you, you should at least have a conversation with them, even if it's brief while you're signing the books. I've seen writers who don't even want to sign books or talk to people. Like, no, I can't sign your name, I'm just going to sign a book real here. I'm like, that's whack to me. Y'all don't have to be here. Y'all know what I'm saying? And I just, because I come from poverty maybe, I come from the very bottom, and I know what it's like to have nothing, I don't take for granted that someone's actually buying my book and supporting me. So I'm like, the least you can say is thank you for being here. You know what I'm saying?
I couldn't help think, when you were just talking, we were trying to organize something in Atlanta many years ago, you and I and somebody else, and some of our elders were pretty helpful, but there was one elder who said he wouldn't help us because he said, we had to struggle. They need to struggle too. I don't know if you remember that.
I do. And
yeah, okay. Naming no names. I'm
going to say this. I'm going to just say this. I think that oppression is real, and I think internalized oppression is real. And people take out stuff because we got disrespected a lot as young people when we were coming up. Like, I can't disrespect young people now, if that makes sense. Because it's almost like older people forgot what they used to be young.
Yeah.
You forgot what it was to be 20 or 30 or 15. I'm like, I can't get down with that. And I just think we need different models around leadership, around how we treat people in our communities, in the arts, all of it. And I remember that, and I think our responsibility is actually to help people not go through the same stuff we went through. I make it a point to share with writers, for example, younger writers like Ezekiel. My wife will tell you, I'm on the phone with him every couple of weeks, like, here's how you navigate this world so you don't have to go through the stuff I went through. What's that going to hurt you? How does that hurt anybody? Just to say, here's the mistakes I made, which are a lot. You know what I mean? You need to learn the publishing game, not just be a writer. You talk about the craft of writing. I also say to Ezekiel and other young writers, you have to study the great writers who came before you. Your work has to stand up on the page. I'm going to tell y'all, I'm proud of this collected writings, but I'm also proud of the fact that I could acknowledge as we were putting this together over the course of 8 or 9 months, a lot of stuff that I wrote absolutely sucked and is not going to go in this book. I'm being serious because my standard is up here. I'm like, does this meet the standard of Maya Angelou, of Baraka, of Langston, of Zora? Is this the standard of Edgar Allan Poe, who I loved in high school, or Shakespeare, who I loved in high school? Y'all feel me? Is this on the level of Pablo Neruda? Is it there? If it's not, then it can't go in this book. And so we take the craft of writing very seriously. I think you would agree, J.B.R., I'm curious to hear it. It's like when I write an essay or an essay collection or a poem or a poetry collection, I do a deep dive into poetry. When I was writing this book, this poetry collection, I was like reading every kind of poet imaginable. You know what I mean? I'm never so arrogant. Who cares? I've been writing for 40 years, 30, 40 years at this point. I'm not so arrogant to think that I don't have something to learn. You know what I mean? And that includes from younger writers and older writers and writers of my generation. I'm not one of those writers either who's just going to hang out with people who just want to be, I love talking about the 90s every now and then. It's cool. That's when I was a young person, right? But I am definitely not interested in being stuck in the 90s. That's mad corny. That's a prison. The 90s are over. I'm happy about 2023. I'm happy to still be alive, y'all. You know what I'm saying?
So we had a lot of conversations through the years about writing that were always as much about reading.
Yeah.
So I can testify. You can ask Kevin about his writing, and he will talk about it. But it always veers into who he's reading, who has impressed him, present, past, thoughts about the future. And just a quick anecdote. The other thing, another thing I don't think Kevin gets a lot of credit for is his prescience. He's really good. Like he's mentioned Ezekiel Hunt a couple times. I would take it really seriously. Because he's really good at identifying people and saying, remember this name. I did a reading series in St. Louis it was decades ago.
Wow.
And I said, I want like the hottest young black writers in the country. I had a grant for this. And so I called Kevin, of course. He gave me so many names of people that I wasn't familiar with, that I familiarized myself with, brought them to town, and some of them are some of the biggest black writers in the world now.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
They've won Booker Prizes, Pulitzer Prizes, MacArthur Genius Grants, you know,
Wow.
and a lot of those people, I learned about them first from you.
Wow.
So that's something you continue to do.
We got to read. Writers got to read. I mean, how do you call yourself a writer if you don't read? I mean, it's just basic, right?
Yeah. I had a question farther down about this, but I'll bring it up now because you talked about the reader.
Yeah.
You and I have talked about the possibility of a Kevin Powell reader for many years because we kept saying, boy, you've got all this material. You've been writing a long time. So
This is crazy, y'all.
So, Kevin.
Yes, sir.
I'm very happy to see it, but I know we've been talking about it for a while.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to do it now?
The publisher, I got to shout out small press out of Brooklyn, Akashic Books, Johnny Temple. He hit me up in the winter of 2022, early 2022. He said, we have been talking about doing a book for a while. He said, I think you should do your collected writings. And I was just finishing the poetry book, and I was literally, I'm still in the middle of the Tupac book. But I was like, man, I've always wanted to do that, but no one ever asked, you know. And I think 𝘕𝑁𝘠🄷, what we're doing right now, I did the reverse with 𝘕𝑁𝘠𝑗abari in a conversation with him. I mean, I got to acknowledge, 𝘕𝑁𝘠𝑗abari is one of our most prolific writers that we've had over the last 30 years. You know, it's not just me, him as well, and there's a few other folks who have you've done at least 20 books, am I right?
23.
23 books, and every genre you can think of. Oh, yeah, you know. But this is where the racism kicks in, and I'm not someone, people think if you talk about racism, oh, you're bitter. Nah, no, we're not. Actually, we're saying that show me writers of any background who can say they have 23 books, 16 books, who can say they can write poetry, plays, screenplays, essays, cultural criticism. We can go down a list of stuff, am I right? Children's books in his case, I haven't even touched that, y'all. You know, show me a writer of any background who can say they have that kind of work. It's called racism, y'all. It's called racism. It's called racism. And unfortunately, we're fortunate we're still here because we had to figure out ways to navigate the racism as black writers. And people will say, why do you have to call yourself a black writer? Because we are black writers. What's wrong with being a black writer? Frank McCourt is an Irish writer, you know what I'm saying? Gloria Steinem is a woman writer. You know, Bell Hooks was a black feminist writer. There's nothing wrong with identifying yourself, but the problem is when people think that your work is not as worthy as other people's work. And so luckily, there are folks out there like a Johnny Temple, whose publishing company, Akashic Books, actually really is about diversity and inclusion of different types of writers. And he gave me this opportunity, and I really appreciate it. But I definitely had pitched it to people. They're like, I'm like, word, you don't see any value in this at all? No, well, you know. And I mean, it's sad. You know, 𝘕𝑁𝘠𝘠𝑗abari mentioned Vibe magazine. Yep, I wrote a lot of cover stories for Vibe magazine, including 3 cover stories that included Tupac Shakur, you know, and I saw white male writers get opportunities at major publications that I never got, who literally would sit there at times, not working, would actually be sitting there in the office just reading the magazine or reading another magazine. You can't tell me that's not privilege and racism. You know what I'm saying? And so what people need to understand, 𝘕𝑁𝘠𝘠𝑗abari, I think, why this is important, because he said we read, what I did when I was a young writer, I studied Langston Hughes' life. Langston Hughes is my favorite writer ever, right? And what I saw was how Langston had to navigate and constantly reinvent himself over and over again as a writer. Sometimes Langston had no money. I mean, listen, y'all, I'm sitting here right now with 16 books, but just 3 years ago, I filed for my second bankruptcy. You know what I mean? I almost got evicted in the middle of COVID. You know what I'm saying? And that's not, I don't want pity or sympathy. I'm just saying to you all, people have no idea how hard it is to be an artist in this country of any background. But if you add race or gender identity, or you happen to come from a certain class background, or if you happen to have if you're differently able, what some people call disabled, it's a whole nother level of struggle that people don't understand. And you got to really, really believe that this is what you were put on this earth to do, to keep going. And so man, let me tell you, this is a marathon. That's what I look at this as. This is a marathon, and it's deep, you know, to be able to say this, and that it actually exists. And I hope it inspires other writers to do the same thing, 𝘕𝑁𝘠𝘠𝑗abari and other writers, because this is, you know, when you leave this earth, you can't say how long you're going to be here. You can't control that, but you can say, hey, I was here. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Here's a record that I was here. And especially now that I'm in my 50s and I'm seeing a lot of my black male peers literally dying in their 40s and 50s, and many of them preventable stuff. a lot of them who are creatives, who are artists. I'm thinking about 𝘠𝘰𝘠𝘕, who was on The Wire. I'm thinking about, DMX. I'm thinking about Shock G, a lot of cats out of the hip hop community who are not making it. I don't take for granted that I got tomorrow. You feel what I'm saying? And so when I was given this opportunity, I'm like, all right, let me hit pause for a little bit on this Tupac book. I know everybody keep asking when that book is coming, but you know what? Pac can wait because my life is right here, right now, and I got to get this done. You know what I mean?
So following up on that, another Kevin Powell anecdote was, it was Kevin who turned me on to, he does know everything about Langston Hughes.
I love Langston.
Everything there is to know.
I love Langston.
I know a lot about Langston Hughes too. He knows everything about Langston Hughes. But several years ago, Arnold Rampersad wrote a 2-volume biography of Langston.
Yeah.
And in my writing circle, Kevin was the first person who had actually read them. And
I did.
And we saw together, Arnold Rampersad.
Yeah.
I think it was at the Langston Hughes Festival in New
That's
York.
right.
We were just kids, just hanging on the perimeter. And I bought the book sort of like in a hurry because Arnold Rampersad was there and he was signing. And I remember mine were like crisp, right out the bag. And he kind of signed them while he was talking to somebody else, Right. And he's going to sign Kevin's name. He looked and he goes, "Oh man, this is well thumbed." And
That's how he speaks too.
And he was very impressed because, like, obviously, it had been read, there was dialogue, and I was like, I got.
I had him as a professor in college. Did you know that?
I think I did know that.
Yeah.
And I was like, I got to get home and read these books and mark them up, as Kevin has done. But back to the reader. Okay, so you have written in practically every genre known to humanity. So here's a question, because you got a variety of different things in there. How do you know what form a particular idea is going to take? Like, how do you know that this particular idea you have is going to be a poem, or you say, no, actually, this is better, this should be a play, or this should be an essay? What's the process like?
Wow, it's changed. I write in every form because I learned that from Langston, because if you want to survive as a writer, you better write in every genre you can. Baldwin too, Baraka too, many people that I love. When I was, it's hard to say. It's spiritual, for me, because I think, and again, whatever your faith, or y'all have a right to be whoever you are, including atheist, agnostic. I happen to come from a mama from South Carolina, and we believe in God real deep, y'all. You know what I'm saying? Because when you poor, you better have something to hold on to believe in, and that's what I was taught. And so I do believe in something greater than myself. And as an African person, which is what I am, a black person, an African person, I don't separate art from the divine. You know what I mean? It's like, how do you listen to Bob Marley and Nina Simone and not feel spiritual? You know what I'm saying? How do you listen to Lauryn Hill's Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, which is 25 years this year, y'all, that it's his birthday, and not feel the divine in that? How do you listen to Kendrick Lamar and some of these folks and be like, man, this is hitting my spirit in a certain kind of way? So for me, I write, I'm much busier than I was when we were coming up as young writers. Back then, me and Tony Medina, shout out to Tony Medina, 𝘊𝘰𝘯𝘪𝘯𝘏, Asha Bendali, great sister writer. We would just write on napkins, paper bags. This is when I used to drink a lot. We used to be at bars and just write we would just write. Sometimes we would even write on our hands or arms. It's just, you got to get that out. Write that down. Tony Medina, I would say to write it down. And so we would write in that way because we just felt like there was an urgency. You got to get these words out of you. But over time, you start to realize, you know what? I kind of have a vision for my writing journey now. Like, I want to write this kind of book. I'm sure you've experienced this. I need to write this children's book. I need to write this essay collection right now. I hadn't written, this is my first poetry book, y'all, in 15 years. I hadn't published a poetry book since 2008. And in fact, I had lost my confidence as a poet. I mean, I said this, I've been saying this to folks. People are like, okay, have you been writing poetry forever? No, I stopped. I stopped for a long time. In fact, if you pay attention to this reader, there's poetry from the 90s in there. There's a couple things from the early 2000s, and it's like a huge gap. And then you get to the 2010s, I was starting to come back to poetry again. Why? Because I was watching mad videos, social media of people who look like me getting killed all over the place. And poetry is the most accessible language to express what you're feeling in that moment. Does that make sense, y'all? You know what I mean? And so, I realized, okay, Kev, you got to get your brain back to poetry. But I was terrified. Because I'm like, is it even any good anymore? Do I even know how to write a poem anymore? So that's when I went back to reading stuff. You know what I mean? But I also love essays. Poetry and essays are probably my two favorite forms. But you also say this stuff like this book is going to be a play. But this book is also, we're literally in the middle of making my first spoken word album right now with musicians, based on the poems in this book. And I haven't really said that aloud to a lot of people, but it's like, you just start to realize, hey, you know what? I can take my words and I can put it in all kinds of forms. You've done this, you know what I'm saying? Because you learn that it's your words. Why can't you recycle it? It's your art form. You can do different things with it. And I'm making a film right now. Brother Justice is in it, and Brother Keith is in it, and that's another art form where I'm enjoying. Like I look at film as poetry. It's just, it's film, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But I just consciously now, I'm like, let me create art that I want to be hopefully good art. People see it as good art, but also that is actually going to not just entertain or titillate people, but hopefully will make people feel and think. Does that make sense, y'all? But then there's times where something will happen, like Cicely Tyson died, or Chadwick Boseman died, or Sidney Poitier died. Chadwick Boseman, I had to write an essay in an hour for CNN.com. Sidney Poitier, it just, my wife will tell you, we're in the backseat of an Uber. I'm like writing as we were in Jersey somewhere. I'm like, I could get this poem out of me, and Sidney Poitier, because this is so important, because I thought about what he meant to me from when I was a little child. So It just comes in different ways. But do I write every day? Right now, no, but I got to get back to the Tupac book for real. We've been on tour for so long with these two books. But at some point, I will get back to my process, which is I got to write every single day, at least for an hour or two. That's important. Writers got to write. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll entertain some questions that the audience members have sent in. Recently, we were exchanging texts when Ralph Yarl was shot for knocking on the wrong door in Kansas City.
Yeah.
Many, many years before that, we were on the phone. You were the first person who called me when a jury acquitted all of the officers who fired 41 shots at Amadou Diallo.
Wow.
I don't know if you remember that. But,
wow.
I was at work, so I wasn't aware of it. Yeah, but you called me before I got the news, right?
Wow.
And you were like, So anyway, I mentioned those two things to kind of show a certain consistency of experience. So one of the tragedies of living in our era is there's always some monumental instance of profound injustice, right? An artist could chart her entire career according to what awful thing was happening when she was writing this particular thing, right?
Yeah.
And an elder poet that we both admire once told me that he had always wanted to write poems about flowers. And every time he sat down to write a poem about flowers, some injustice was committed against black people. And he ended up writing about that particular thing. And he must be 80 years old now, and I'm still following him, and I don't think he's gotten to those flowers, So,
wow.
Yeah, so.
That's deep.
What's it like to write, and what we, in a time that we can only describe as perpetually turbulent?
It's crazy. So y'all, when I was in college, I was 20 years old. I got my first check as a writer, and there was an article for a black newspaper that doesn't exist anymore in New York City called The Black American, which actually was owned by a Trinidadian brother named Carl Alford.
How much were you paid for the article?
$25. Yeah, it was a lot of money. I needed that money.
Yeah.
But guess what the article was about? A young brother named Michael Griffith who went to a section of Queens, New York called Howard Beach, and some white racist males chased him and his relative and friends, and they ran him over with a car. And then they lied and said they thought it was like an animal or a tire or something. This is back in the day. And so I literally, when you look at the Kevin Powell reader, I couldn't find that article, otherwise that would have been in the book. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it. But literally, I'm talking about a whole range of stuff that pops up. In this book is Hurricane Katrina. You know what I mean? It's so much stuff. And, I need to say this, a couple things. I made a conscious decision when I was writing this book to actually include the flowers, because I think about my mental health a lot. You know what I mean? Because one thing that oppression, any form of oppression, hatred, discrimination does to people, it affects your mental health. Trauma is real. And you hear people now saying, oh, we use the word trauma too much. I'm like, listen, y'all, we've only been using trauma for the last couple of years. Finally, we have a word to describe what many of us have been feeling. Y'all with me out there? And it says, I think it's actually traumatic when people tell you not to use the word that actually is the word that makes the most sense about what we've been dealing with. You know, if you actually know anything about American history, just from my perspective for a second, it's traumatic to be chilling in Africa, minding your business, and be kidnapped and be brought here, and literally for 250 years be forced to work for free and be brutalized and be stripped of everything, told that you are ugly, that you have nothing. Y'all with me? You know, get your names are gone. All of that is gone. That's traumatic. Then it's traumatic to have Reconstruction and told that you now can vote, that you're now free, but it lasts all of 12 years, and then you find yourself hanging from trees. Y'all with me? That's traumatic. And then you got 100 years of that segregation, and I ask y'all a simple question. Everywhere I go, Jabari, what would it be? What would this country look like if the Civil Rights Movement didn't even happen? People don't want to answer that question. You know what I mean? And so that's even trauma. Then there's the trauma that we've lived through since the Civil Rights era, because you killed up all these leaders. Fred Hampton and Mark Clark are literally killed in their bed. Dr. King on the balcony, Malcolm X at a ballroom. I'm thinking about heroin in the 70s, crack cocaine in the 80s, and the AIDS pandemic. That was traumatic. The prison industrial complex is traumatic. Y'all with me here for a second? And so in order to keep myself sane, I got poems in this book that reference Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. Oh, yes, I do. But I also have poems that are just about simple things that I love. You know what I mean? Like, I love hip hop. I love the Beatles. I love baseball. Jabari loves baseball. And I think you do. That's one of the things that have connected. We both love baseball.
Right.
And I think that, like, you know, I hear the elder, but I refuse to allow myself to be put in any box where, I mean, for years, y'all, I've been, you know, I remember when Vibe magazine was over for me, I went to certain publications and said, hey, can I write about jazz? Can I write about rock and roll? It was actually said to me, what do you know about jazz or rock and roll? I said, well, my people actually created both those things. So I actually know a lot about jazz and rock and roll. And so I realized that, you know, you can let the system of racism put you in a box, but you also can put yourself in a box and think that you only can talk about certain things, which I think is not good for your mental health. Y'all with me? You know, but then when you talk about, you know, the stuff that we're dealing with, it's the systemic racism, you know, and this is a challenge to everyone out there. How do you identify yourselves? You know, listen, this country was founded on racism. Plain and simple. It was founded on racism. What was done to indigenous people, what some of y'all call Native Americans, that's called racism. You know, the fact that we can barely see any indigenous people left in this country, that's called racism. What was done to black people in this country and still being done to us? I mean, can you imagine, in our film, my wife is a co-producer and co-writer on this film that Justice and Keith are in, we have 60 black males between the ages of 10 and 90. I want you to think about this for a second, between 10 and 90. Some of them are heterosexual, some of them are queer, some are transgender, some are working class, poor, formerly incarcerated, some have PhDs. Why is it that all these black men have the same stories about racism? Y'all with me? And so, you know, yeah, I write about racism a lot because I have no other choice, but I also say, you know, part of the reason why we do what we do as writers, as black content creators, is because our allies are few and far in between. You know what I mean? Brother James Monroe is an ally, but there's not a lot of folks who are actually allies. Oh, y'all talking about this stuff too much, or why you got to bring that up? I'm like, do you realize what it's like to turn on Instagram in the morning and hear the story that a 16-year-old black boy in Kansas City, Missouri, happened to ring the wrong doorbell, and a white man says nothing but shoots him in the head? We're lucky he's still here. Right. Y'all with me out there?
Right, right.
You know what I mean? And then he says, oh, he was so big.
Right. You say he was a 6-foot black male.
He's 5'7", y'all.
And 140 pounds.
140 pounds. And look at me. I've been told by people, you're so big. You know what it's like to be on a plane, and if you're lucky enough, because I ain't got money all the time, but you happen to get upgraded to first class, instead of asking you what you do, someone, well-meaning white person, who oftentimes doesn't realize you're racist, says, well, are you a comedian? Oh, you must play do you play football? I mean, look at me. Do I look like I play football? And I'm like, or basketball. I'm not even scratching. I'm 6 feet. No. I'm like, no, I've written 16 books. And there's like this disbelief. That's called racism. It says to me, if you call yourself an American and you don't know about the contributions of all people in this country, that's called ignorance. You know what I mean? And so, you know, yeah, I want to write about all of that stuff, but my sanity is kept by being able to write about quote-unquote flowers, Jabari. And one thing I got to say, here's what's happening to us, and I want to challenge anyone who calls themselves a black leader out there. we got to have a plan, y'all. And we don't need any more leadership that's about self. We don't need any more leadership that's about money, being famous, being an influencer, who they're associated with, because that's a value system that ain't really your community. That's someone else's community that you've taken on. And I see that, I'm saying this everywhere I go now, it can't be the same old stuff that we've seen, because where has that gotten us? I'm sick and tired of people who want to be famous, who call themselves activists, public intellectuals, philanthropists. We need people who actually are anonymous, y'all, who actually do the work in the community on a regular basis. And if you're really serious about being a leader, you also got to deal with your mental health, your spiritual health, because you don't think you're traumatized. Eve Ensler, the creator of the Vagina Monologues, my sister and friend, right? She says all the time, she now goes by V, the whole country is traumatized. You don't think so? My wife and I, we love David Muir, ABC News, right? World News Tonight. He reminds me of Peter Jennings, who I used to love when I was coming up. You know what I'm saying? But every story is something about violence in America. You don't think that's traumatizing? You don't think it's traumatizing? I know for me, I come into these spaces, I don't care where I'm at now. I'm like, where are the exits at, just in case?
Right.
You know what I mean? And so we need a different kind of leadership model, because what we have had ain't working. I don't care who you are. I don't care what organization you claim to represent. It ain't working. Why can I say that? I've been an activist for 40 years. I've been in every kind of organization, every kind of movement you can think of. And what I feel where we're at now, it's like, where are you spiritually? Where are you politically? Where are you culturally? You know what I'm saying? Where are you mentally? Are you actually modeling what you claim that you want to see in our communities? You feel what I'm saying, y'all? Or are you just perpetuating the madness? I'm talking to everybody. And this whole notion of looking for a savior organization, a savior leadership, is destructive. You want a leader? Look in the mirror. But if you're really serious about being a leader, then you got to read, you got to study, you got to travel, you got to know this history, you got to know movements, you got to know how to organize stuff, and you got to be about some business that ain't just about making some paper for you or your organization. You know what I mean? I think about that a lot, man. I did an event, a book event, 𝘕𝑁𝐺, back in February, Black History Month. I'm not going to say the name of the person, but they're one of those famous leaders now. Not only were they late to the Zoom, how you going to be late for Zoom? But they were in a vehicle driving, and they was talking to people out the window, the whole 9 yards, and I was just like, this is a joke, man. You know what I mean? It's a joke. And so, Brother James, I got to give you your flowers while you're here, man. Like, Brother James here, and these folks at the Philadelphia African American Museum I'm going to next week, I pay attention to even the leaders and institutions who are professional and kind, and the people they work with are professional and kind, and they respond. They don't say things like, I'm too busy. I thank you, because you have no idea the stuff that we see out there that we have to deal with. You know what I mean? So I thank you and your staff, brother. Give them a round of applause, seriously. But that's what we need. Not this me stuff and trying to make money and all that kind of stuff and just forget the people. Because what I see, y'all, and I'm just going to leave it here, and I had to say this, it's like, as we're all trying to be famous, everybody wants to be famous now. Everybody wants to be famous. Look, y'all, I was on a little TV show back in 1992, some of y'all know about, called The Real World. And I was at Vibe magazine, which was founded by Quincy Jones, so I know something about being out there. Bell Hooks, I'm going to leave it here, 𝘕𝑁𝐺, said something to me I'll never forget. Do not be addicted to the fame plantation. I'm here to serve. I don't care about attention. I could care less about that. I want to help people.
I want to be mindful of your interests. I know you're eager to get to the signing and opportunities to have conversations with Kevin one-on-one. I also want to be mindful of the responsibilities of the staff and the things they have to do. So I'm limited to one question, and I apologize for that, because we got a few really good questions.
Okay.
And hopefully, baby.
Can we do more, James? I didn't even want to put you on the spot, but I'm just asking.
3 to 4. Oh,
thank you, sir. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. Because these are good questions, and you're an excellent person to ask them. So sometimes you get questions and they're kind of generic, but these are obviously people who want to hear your thoughts. I appreciate that. So the first one is, what are your thoughts of current hip hop music, and
I knew that was coming.
Where do you think it can go from here? How can we reclaim its cultural roots, if that's possible? And the poster notes, as a former freelance hip-hop journalist, I feel beyond lost.
I think we got to make a couple things, y'all. We got to make a distinction. There's hip hop culture over here, then there's hip hop, the industry over here. And a lot of people just say hip hop and it's all jumbled up. DJ Nomadic, who I've known for quite some time, represents hip hop culture, just like I represent the culture. The culture, a little quick history lesson. When Dr. King was talking at the end of his life about a poor people's campaign, that what does it matter you can sit anywhere on the bus if you ain't got no money to get on the bus, right? What does it matter you can sit at the lunch counter if you ain't got no money to buy a hamburger, right? He was saying there's something wrong with the economic justice in this country. Y'all follow me for a second. Well, the same poor people that Dr. King told us not to forget are the poor people who created hip hop in New York City, right? They were poor African Americans, poor West Indians, and poor Latinx people. Do not leave out Latinx people, black people. Latinx people are right there, absolutely. West Indian, Latinx folks, African Americans, right? And what do? DJ Nomadic's a DJ. 2 turntables, making some vinyl. You know, microphone, I'm an MC, right? DJ MC. I'm going to dance on concrete, I'm going to dance on some linoleum, I'm going to dance on cardboard, that's the dancer. Magic marker spray paints, I'm a graffiti writer, right? I'm going to tag. Think about the 1970s. Even if you weren't born back then, go back and there's a great documentary on PBS that Chuck D, my brother Chuck D from Public Enemy produced. Just the first episode lays out what I'm talking about. Here's what was going on in America in the 1970s in places like New York City. So that's the culture, the DJ, the MC, graffiti writer, graffiti artist, dancer, right? The industry, the question is, I'll answer like this. Back in the 1830s, this is why history is important. Malcolm X said it, history is a people's memory, and without it, we're demoted to the lower animals. There was something called the minstrel show that was created, right? Well, what was the minstrel show? It was racist white folks, not all white folks, but the racist white folks, in order to reinforce their sense of superiority, which is a lie, of course, ain't nobody superior to nobody, we're going to depict black people as over-sexualized, violent, dangerous, and immoral. We're going to say that there's something wrong with their noses and their lips and their hair and their skin color and their body types. Follow me for a second. This is going to become the dominant form of entertainment in America from the 1800s into the 1900s. How do I know? Because go back to movies from the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and what do you see? White folks in blackface. Feel where I'm going for a second, right? And I'm talking about famous white folks with names like Fred Astaire and Bing Crosby. It's all out there, right? And dangerous, immoral, violent, right? This is who these black people are. And so when you look at hip-hop, the industry, when this culture, and DJ Nomadic knows what I'm talking about, anyone who's a hip-hop, my wife knows what I'm talking about, there was a diversity of voices in hip-hop. Now, don't get it twisted. Hip-hop has always been a male-centered, male-dominated art form. We act like women weren't there. August 11th, 1973, a black woman from Jamaica in the West Indies named Cindy Campbell actually produced the first hip-hop event in the Bronx, New York. Her brother, Kool Herc, was the DJ. That's why we're celebrating hip-hop 50 years later. It was a black woman. But black men, I believe, black males and Latinx males, overwhelmed the culture. And because America was not only founded on racism, but also founded on sexism, hip-hop is just the latest manifestation of what is going on in larger society. It happened in jazz. It happened in rock and roll. It happened in the blues. Males practicing sexism, male domination. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? And so by the time we got to the early 1990s, I'm at Vibe magazine, and I'm interviewing Tupac Shakur for the first time. It's the cover where he's in the straitjacket. I said, Pac, how come you're not making positive stuff? Your mom's is Fannie Shakur. She's a Black Panther, blah, blah, blah. He said, well, Kev, and I remember Tupac was dead at 25. So when I first started interviewing him, he was only 22 years old. He said, I wanted to make my music positive, but the record labels told me that positive don't sell no more. So you can, if you look at the last 30 years, honestly, 25 last 30 years, there's been an overemphasis on the N-word. Everybody calls himself the N-word. The reason why I say that, if nothing else, one of the most important books that 𝘕𝑁𝘭𝑟𝑖 has ever done is a book actually called The N-Word. Because one of the things that's brilliant about that book that 𝘕𝑁𝘭𝑟𝑖 did, and I got to give you your flowers, he actually gives you the history of where the word comes from. Some of us are not just ignorant in America, we are enthusiastically ignorant. We'll say stuff and don't even know where it came from. And so what I began to notice, Nomadic knows what I'm talking about, my wife knows what I'm talking about, anyone who's a hip hop head knows what I'm talking about. Wait a minute, why is the music that's using the N-word over and over again being played up, or calling women B-I-T-C-H's, H-O's, or in recent times, thoughts being played up? Why is it that we hear all this stuff about drugs and guns, but we don't hear any kind of balance anymore in the music? We just lost Plug 2, 𝘠𝘩𝘰𝘠𝘦𝘳𝘕, Dave from De La Soul. Let me tell you something. In that era that we call the golden era of hip-hop, roughly from the mid-'80s into the early '90s, you know what I mean? I loved NWA, and I loved Latifah and Light, and I loved De La Soul and Tribe. We didn't say, oh, these over here is, no, we're like, it's all hip-hop. But at some point, I believe, just like how we had the blaxploitation era of movies in the 1970s, where the dominant thing you kept seeing was black people as pimps, hustlers, prostitutes. How do you destroy a people? You put out certain destructive images of them, just like that was done with the minstrel show. Now, Kevin Powell, that sounds like a conspiracy. Well, slavery was a conspiracy. Somebody conspired to make that happen. Segregation was a conspiracy. Someone said, for whites only and colors only over here. And you're going to tell me, as someone who, as 𝘠𝘪𝘵 just said, I know my history, you're going to tell me this is just a coincidence that certain kind of music has been dominant? And if you really pay attention, if you travel the way I do, I've been to all 50 states in this country. You turn on the radio stations, everywhere they play the same 12, 13, 14 song. That's a coincidence? And so that's the culture. We represent this, which was about life. The industry is about death. And so as we celebrate hip-hop at 50, the industry and the culture are fighting. You know how I know? Because I saw on social media people attack Megan Thee Stallion, who was shot in the feet by a black man named Tory Lanez, and they said she was lying. Because the sexism is winning, y'all. The misogyny is winning, y'all. The hatred of each other is winning, y'all. And some of it, if you grew up the way I grew up, which I didn't learn any of my history in school. I didn't learn it at church or religious institutions, any of that kind of stuff. I didn't learn it in the household because my mama didn't know it. And your whole education about blackness is coming from what you hear on the radio. You're going to shoot a woman in the feet and think it's like no big deal. Make sense? So I'm saying to y'all, if you really want to have a conversation about hip-hop, here's the culture, and then here's the industry. Make it your business to actually learn about the culture, but then challenge the folks who participate in the industry. And one thing I don't do, 𝘠𝘪𝘵, is like, you know, I don't do what older people did when I was a young person back in the 90s. Oh, I hate hip-hop, because I mean, I was that cat. My own mama said, you look like you on drugs. Why don't you comb your hair? What's up with your earrings? Da-da-da. I'm like, Mom, this is my culture. Why are your pants set? I'm like, Mom, this is my culture. Y'all had, you had afros and bell bottoms. Come on, y'all. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? But, so I don't do that to young people. What I do say is you need to learn the history of this culture that you claim to be representing, and don't be so lazy intellectually and such a follower that you think you can just say, what's up my end, what's up my end, what's up my end, what's up my end. You ain't got no other word other than that, a word that was created by someone else to tell you to hate yourself. But the sad thing is, 𝘠𝘪𝘵, I hate to say this, one of the things that has happened with the industry being the way it is and being so stuck is that you now have people who are 30 and 40 and 50 and older, still sagging their pants, with gray hair, you know what I mean, saying crazy stuff to each other. I mean, don't get me wrong, I wear my Timbs, my hoodie, I'm a hip-hop head. I'm going to wear the uniform of my culture. But I'm also like, I'm not a juvenile, yo. I'm not a juvenile, son. You feel what I'm saying? And so I don't think we're going to realize for years the devastating effect of what the industry has done to us as a people across generations now. You know what I mean? And so, you know, we got some work to do, but we have to have some conversations about this. And as we celebrate hip-hop at 50, there's got to be some real conversations. And it can't just be, you know, oh, hooray, we're still here. No, I mean, this is problematic, man. You know what I'm saying? This is problematic. And women are still fighting to hear their voices heard in hip-hop. Am I right, Nomadic? Still. Yep. And so just like there's sexism in the larger society, there's sexism within hip-hop. We got to challenge it.
Thanks so much. One more question. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and get back to the path one might have to chart to become a writer. And the question is, how does one start following their dream to become a writer?
Oh, my God.
Particularly if they're older.
Oh, you know, wow. Frank McCourt, I'm going to use that example. The great Irish-American writer,
Yeah,
Frank
yeah.
McCourt, Angela's Ashes,
Yeah.
*Tis*, and I'm thinking of, what was the third book that he got to write? I can't think of it. But, man, this man published his book in his 60s. Toni Morrison published her first book when she was 40. You do not allow age to stop you from dreaming. Y'all with me out there? You know what I mean? I think that, you know, a writer has to write. A writer has to write. I think you have to just figure out the discipline of it. And we were people, 𝘕𝘂 and I, who started very young. And maybe it's just me, but I'm going to ask you too. There's a blessing to starting young, but then there's also like, damn. You know what I mean? Because it's hard. You know what I mean? And I wish I had the level of intellectual, emotional maturity. I didn't. And so I was, 𝘕𝘂 knows, I was wild as a young dude. Like wild, like real wild. Like I really believed that a writer should smoke cigarettes, smoke weed, drink liquor, party. I wouldn't even go to bed until like 3, 4 in the morning. I had a whole crew of friends I could call between 12 midnight and 4 o'clock. I was living that life, y'all. And I think for older writers, you've lived. And if you say, this is what I want to do, you got to go for it. You know what I mean? And I think we need your voices. When COVID hit in the summer in 2020, I created a writers workshop on Facebook called, on Zoom and Facebook called Kevin Powell's Writing Workshop. We got 1,400 writers in that group on Facebook. And what was beautiful, we had writers who were teenagers, who were kids. We had writers who were 70, 80 years old. It was wonderful, you know what I mean? 𝘕𝘂, that's when I interviewed 𝘕𝘂 for that, during that time on Zoom. And one of my favorite writers there is an older black woman, lesbian sister named 𝘕𝘰𝘰 Cooper, who writes black, queer, lesbian, sex, science fiction. This is how she describes it. It's brilliant. And I just saw her Monday because she came to our event in New York Monday, and I encouraged her. We encourage her. You know what I mean? She gets down because she's like, is anyone going to really publish me at 70 years old? I'm like, 𝘕𝘂, you're 𝘕𝘂. 𝘕𝘰, we're going to find you a publisher. We're going to find, you're going to get yourself out there. You know, and God bless her. She showed up every writing workshop. Am I right? She showed up every writing workshop, and like, you're never too old. You know, I think an elder said to me, who's a photographer, 𝘔𝘰𝘯𝘕 who I've worked with, said, man, don't get caught up in this decade stuff, this generational stuff, this age stuff. Yeah. If you really are passionate about something, you got to go for it, yo. You got to go for it. And I'm going to keep it real with y'all. You know, I'm going to keep it 1,000 with y'all here. Just 3 years ago, I'm in my second and last marriage. I'm happily married, thank God. Thank my wife. Wonderful human being. But I was going through a divorce. COVID hit. Kobe's plane had gone down. I was devastated by that. One of my friends that I've known for his whole life committed suicide, a filmmaker. You know what I mean? Like I said, bankruptcy. Nearly was evicted because I didn't have any money. It was COVID. These spaces were shut down. Am I right, Brother James? These spaces were shut down. And man, I'm like, yo, what saved me was creating that writing workshop partially and seeing all those folks who just wanted to write of different ages, different backgrounds. And I was like, this is deep, man. Because I thought like my life was over. And then those people don't even realize how much life they gave me. Just saying, and our mantra was, I'm a writer. In fact, how many of y'all out there are writers? Just raise your hand and make some noise if you're a writer. Yeah, writers got to write. Writers got to write. Writers got to write. Yeah. Writing has saved my life. And I say to you all, why is it important to write? And we said this in one of the other stops. I don't know if it was Dallas or Houston. We've been in so many places the last couple of weeks. But when you see all these mass shootings or domestic violence or people gay bashing or all this violence that we see happening around the country, hating folks because they're Jewish, hating folks because they're Muslim, I mean, come on, y'all. Imagine if we encourage people to actually write down how they feel instead of just turning to violence in some form all the time. Y'all with me? You know what I mean? Imagine if we encourage people to express what they're feeling. You know, when I saw the whole shooting in Louisville, Kentucky, the young man had 2 degrees. He was, 25 years old. All right, I'm going to shoot at my employees at the bank. We're not encouraged to express ourselves, 𝘕𝘂, in this country. I'm not saying everyone's got to be you, 23 books, me, 16 books, but I do think part of my mandate now, no matter how old or how young people are, I want y'all to express yourselves. Because so many of us don't even realize all the traumas that we're carrying around. How have I been able to forgive my mother, which is in this book, my father, which is in this book? It's writing. I go to therapy, but this has also been therapeutic for me. Does that make sense, y'all?
Yes.
This has been healing for me. I have suffered through depression most of my life. This has saved me. Does it make sense? I've been violent. Now I'm like, man, I'm about peace and love. You know, I'm a hippie. I'm a hip hop head and a hippie nomadic. I'm with both.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be a part of this madness, but I couldn't have gotten there if it wasn't for writing stuff down. You know what I'm saying?
I want to wrap it up, but I do want to point out one of the things about your wonderful writing workshop, which made it really unique, is that it was free.
It was real free.
It's free.
And people told me I was crazy. I ain't had no money, y'all.
It's
I'm
free.
I'm keeping 100 with y'all. When I was doing those free workshops, I had negative bank balances. Like, it was that bad. But I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because people were hurting. Y'all remember what it was, the first few months of COVID? And people, especially folks like me, I was by myself. A lot of folks like I'm by myself. And man, and I'm glad we're in Boston, because up until COVID, Zoom was a TV show for me, straight up.
Right.
Shout out to Boston and Zoom. I love Zoom.
Me too. Yeah.
Come on in, Zoom, 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 Zoom. Come on in, Zooma, 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 Zoom. Y'all showing your ages. But wasn't that show great?
Yeah.
And then when I learned that it was intentional to have children of diverse backgrounds together, I was like, wow, this is so dope.
Yeah, so that was really radical.
I'm sorry, I just had a childhood moment.
No, the workshop, the fact that it was free was radical, but also reminiscent of the free writing workshops in Harlem and Watts during the 1960s. So, shout out for that.
And we put out a book. The writing workshop put out a book called '2020, the Year That Changed America. So you can see it. You can find it on Amazon. So, and a lot of the writers, just like you said about in the tradition back in the '90s, and these are diverse writers. It was the first time they were ever published. So it was really, it was a hard year for me, but that gave me hope, and I'm thankful to be here. And I'm thankful for y'all. You have no idea, but it's like, and I want to say to y'all, don't give up. Don't give up. Wherever you are in your life, just don't give up, and just find a new passion, but also make sure you do something in your community, because we don't need people getting shot in the head as someone's ringing the wrong doorbell,
right? Or
cheerleaders getting shot in the car. Y'all know the stories. Just this week alone, it's like the Wild Wild West out this piece for real, So, wow. Are we done?
Brother, I want to thank you for sharing yourself with us tonight.
Thank you.
I want to thank James Monroe and the staff here at the Museum of Science, and invite James back to the stage.
Let's keep it going for Kevin and 𝘕𝑗abari, please.
Thank you, James.
Thank you both for being here. I don't really have a lot to say. That was an incredible conversation. We're really honored that we were able to host on our stage. So thank you both.
Thank you
so much. And a huge thank you to 𝘕𝘰𝘠 Carter and New England Blacks in Philanthropy for making tonight possible. Everyone at the Lowell Institute, and I want to echo Kevin's shout out to Justice Roe Williams and Keith Maskell, who were instrumental in making tonight happen. They are here, I believe. There.
Hey. Oh my God.
And both of them have two incredible events that are happening in this room in May. Deconstructing the Fitness Industrial Complex and Living a Trigger Life podcast. Pick up our mailer and make sure you come back for both of those. We're going to say goodnight to all of our virtual friends. Thank you for tuning in. And we're going to invite all of you to join us one level down for our reception. Our friends from Frugal Bookstore are down there.